I am Miguel Ludert. Miguel Eduardo, sorry, Miguel Ludert is my last name. Miguel Eduardo is my middle name. And I am an artist. I have been working in painting, drawing, such things for about 40 plus years. I literally started when I was 3 years old, never really stopped except for a period of time after college working through depression. So as that goes, you don't do as many creative things. But as I'll hopefully walk through here, I will show you what I was doing back then, or what I was doing college age. I need to do one last thing over here and set up a timer. Stopwatch. And okay, hopefully that'll stay on. Okay, so this is the probably second to last picture of me with actual hair. So that my hair is very curly. It's not really particularly relevant here, but this is me painting a mural at Virginia Commonwealth University, which is my alma mater, for sculpture. I went there primarily for sculpture and conceptual art. So a lot of what I really picked up from there was how to think about art. So being the nerdy guy that I am, this is really like I became I wouldn't say fixated, but hyper attentive to the artistic process and what really goes into the individual into the individual works. And so back then, I was so these are some of the early drawings that I was doing. These are in pastels, just kind of giving you a little bit of a flavor of kind of what was happening back then. Very much into figurative drawing. I've always been into figures and portraits. These are two of my favorite sketches of that time. Quick gesture drawings of kind of like getting familiarized, but I think they're important because they both inform my current work and the dark shit that I started doing afterwards. This is a drawing of bananas in the negative. This is kind of when I really started working with some perceptual things related to what we're actually looking at. So these are bananas drawn in the negatives, all the whites are black, all the blacks are white. And whenever we flip it over to its proper coloration, so this is early on really trying to think about what are we actually looking at when we're looking at this work? What are we actually looking at? Because we're not looking at an object, we're looking at a representation of an object. So we can start playing around with how objects are represented. What are the rules and how we can start to break them? So this is really kind of formative to some of the things that you'll see later on, of invisible images, of dimensionality, because on a two-dimensional plane, I can play it and do whatever I want. So this is, So Picasso kind of did a similar thing with Cubism, along with other people experimenting in that era, where they're looking at how things are perceived and playing around with it. They were working through with time, they were working with dimensionality, looking at different things around different dimensions. I'm looking with the actual perceptual ability here of our eyes and seeing, like, can I reinterpret what I'm seeing in different colors and different shapes and different things to really get the message across. But getting into the dark work that I was just talking about, I was really, really heavily into industrial music and heavy metal music and Tool and all these things back then. Incredibly big Tool fan, incredible influence on my work. Though right now I don't try to do as much dark work. This is really kind of like the era when that all kind of started coming together, the darker influences of the stuff that really became the ecstatic stuff later on, which I'm working on right now. A little bit more about that in a second. So these are some of the very early college works. These, except for the top right-hand one, these are all pretty monumental. This lady, Carmen, she is 6 foot by 6 foot. It was actually two large panels that got put together, but kind of exploring some ideas around fidelity, around sexuality, some different things like that. It's very, in my mind, a very young piece of work. It doesn't have like everything that I really want to deliver across from it, outside of this gravitas of this huge, immense red figure. So this one is really kind of more of a temple figure. This is kind of like working through some of the religious concepts, but again, you can't really tell too much there. But this one is probably the only surviving one out of the ones here. This one I think is 7 feet by 3 feet, and still in my storage unit at this point in time. I have no place to put it. But this is the Pietà, the Virgin Mary holding the Christ, and these interpretations of blood of Christ, menstrual blood as the child, all of these things that I'm kind of working through here, kind of like pushing some of those, pushing some of those edges of like, what does it mean to be sacrilegious? What does it mean to like really push like this idea of what is religion today in looked at from a new vantage point? So these are kind of some of the early influences that I was working with. So these are some of the initial artists that I was also working with, and you can see over here, this is Francis Bacon. It's his take on one particular pope. I can't remember his name, but you'll see the obvious similarities between the Francis Bacon work and some of the stuff that I was doing very early on. H.R. Giger, who did the Alien movies, he was a huge influence at that time. And of course, John Sargent Singer is More Than a Line, I'll just leave it here, and Flaming June. I've done master copies of both of these, which I'll have in the later work. And if you're here actually live, you'll see them in the gallery. So yeah, so this work was kind of like the foundation of really where I started thinking about art, composition, and different things. But at this point in time, I was really insecure about color. This being hedonism in color, I really wanted to push, talk about how I've used color, coming in from this kind of like monochrome, golds, blacks, deep reds, kind of like this more visceral, like bile type palette. That was really kind of talking like emotionally of some of the things that were going on for me at the time, leading towards the depression that really kind of burnt me out after college. I didn't make artwork for a very long time. Throughout this time and throughout my life, I've been experiencing mystical states of different sorts. So a lot of them have been spontaneous mystical states. My first memory is actually of a mystical state. I don't call it a dream because it doesn't work like a dream in my head or in my memory. But it was I was going underneath an underpass and time stopped momentarily. I saw a dark figure at the head of the bus that reached out to me and wanted me to come with it. A kind of cloudy, nebulous figure. I don't really have a description of it. And when I refused, and this was very, very young, everything resumed and I was back on the bus again. So it was very strange because it was happened like, quick changes in my mind, very strong perceptual things. Anyway, point of the matter being, from the very early age, I was having mystical experiences. Those have influenced my work throughout. Different types of mystical experiences, from dream states, from spontaneous states, from precognitive states. Some, like, I once I would hesitate to call it a mystical state, but I once had a fever dream so bad I thought it was a spaceship. So, like really exploring these non-ordinary states of the mind. And also at this time, really kind of figuring out like, what is magic? What is occultism? What is philosophy? What is science? And how do I make sense of the world around me? And seeing that I've had these experiences already, I couldn't discount the fact that they've made a massive influence in how I think about the world day to day. So yeah, this is kind of like the early panorama of what I was doing. And so during this time, after this time, poured into depression, threw out a couple paintings, did that type of thing. But then I went through this whole transformative period where I'm like, I can't call myself an artist if I'm not making artwork. If I have not made artwork for the past 5 years, what the hell am I really doing? It's not a matter of being a poser or anything like that. It's a matter of like, this is my identity that I've had since I was literally 3 years old, drawing with my father. My father was a painter. And I cannot respect myself. I do not have a self-identity at that time without this thing. So It was a really deep journey of self-discovery, rediscovery of arts, restudy of arts, studying a lot of art history, reclaiming the lost skills that I had, and putting myself through the ringer for several years of how do I make new work. Talking to different people, talking to different artists of why they make artwork, what is really artwork about. And one of the pivotal moments that I really had in that journey was a friend of mine at his house had a stairwell. And underneath the stairwell, he sank down very down to the bottom and opened up this little tiny door. And he's like, "This is my mouse house." And I'm like, "Oh." It had a little couch, a little bookcase, wallpaper. It was like a little trim. It was just perfect little mouse house. And he's like, "Yeah, this is my mouse house. You know, whenever and I have a guest over, he's like, yeah, this is my mouse house." And it's like, this isn't going to be at a gallery. Nobody's really going to see this. And it reminded me, making art for art's sake, which to me is more about making art, not for the sake of the art, but making art because it fulfills a role in my life that allows me to see something so much bigger than just doing the day-to-day thing. It is my connection to the more liminal things in our reality. In my reality, I should say. So around this time, I found pop surrealism. So here I'm going to be talking about some of the influences that I've had to get me here. So this guy, well, not this guy in particular, but the painter Martin Whitfuth. He likes to do some kind of apocalyptic, hardcore style animals, often talking about climate change, impact of humans on climate, impact of humans on animals, these types of things. And his work is just kind of in your face. It is a different way of looking at these animals in these kind of like caustic environments, which really appealed to that dark art sensibility that I'm bringing in from my previous years. Over here, this is more of his later work. Some of his earlier work is really about graphic novels, is James Jean. So this is one I just saw in Vancouver. There's a current exhibit right now between now and I think mid-September if you're in Vancouver for any reason. But he is a world famous artist. He is just brilliant in so many ways, and I can kind of dissect a little bit of this. I'll dissect some of it right now because it really does relate to some of the work that I do later on. Like thinking about, like, say for example here, how there's a gradient coming out from the center, and each of these outlines are differently colored to highlight the separation between the different areas and really kind of make almost a cutout feel, but as well to kind of give momentum to the gradient. So these are some of the ideas that I've taken from him long ago and kind of start really applying them to my own work. I'll be, again, referring back to these images later on. So this one is a print that I have above my desk at home. I look at this all the time and I'm always floored. This guy has just such an amazing drawing ability. But if you'll notice, as you see some of my work, it's got a lot of that same busyness. It's got a lot of that same momentum of what gets portrayed. Yeah. So this one is also one of James Jean's, talking about some of the erotic stuff that I was doing at that time, or I was really interested in at the time. So this is really the beginning of me fully exploring erotic artwork. There had been some other artists, people like Gustav Klimt, Egon Schiele, obviously H.R. Giger, if you're familiar with his work, that were very, very erotic, very, I hesitate to say sex forward, but putting the body and its capabilities and what that represents very, very forward. And of course, I can't really talk about visionary art, which I consider myself in the kind of space between visionary art and pop surrealism, somewhere along those lines, without talking about Alex Grey. So Alex Grey, he did the covers for Tool, which I mentioned before is a huge influence of mine, and how Tool has created their aesthetic, how Tool has created their music, their writing, the precision of it, kind of went along with the very intellectual way I saw things in college, how I was taught to think about art, very intellectually, very, how do I say, not necessarily reductive, but deconstructing something and being able to reconstruct it again. Postmodernist, if you will. So this is the net of being, if I recall correctly. So this is Hanayata. Again, so one of the things that I often work with is femininity in my artwork. To dip my toe into the subject of gender, I internally identify agendered, present masculine, but from that from that center of agenderedness, things go a lot of different ways. The artwork that I create is always very strongly feminine. There's the two places where I am perhaps the most feminine, and that is when I'm painting, and that is when I'm dancing. Both of those is really when a lot of this really comes out. So when seeing work from people like Kiki Smith, who does a lot of like really, again, grotesque type of work, she's often talking about menstrual stuff. She's often talking about particular female-oriented issues. That was a huge influence in the work, again, through some of the darker sides, but here, through some of the pop surrealist, visionary, psychedelic side of really what it is that I'm doing. So she's got these beautiful bright colors, like this deconstructed leg down here, that's kind of mind-blowing to me, or at least was mind-blowing to me when I was seeing it. And just these splashes of color, like this kind of like this boldness of how she's showing up, this boldness of the painting. Really, I see a lot of the art that artists make is kind of talking about like this internal force that we have inside that wants to get expressed out, and how it gets expressed out through the extruder that is our creativity. This is what she came up with, and I feel like she's a really passionate person and probably really intense to be around because her paintings are so intense and vibrant and kind of in your face. And I take that as an influence of how does an artist behave? How does an artist show up? I think of people like Andy Warhol. I think of people like Basquiat. I think of people, the rivalries between Da Vinci and Michelangelo from 500 years ago. We still hear about them, of how Michelangelo was such a prima donna, he had to paint the ceiling on a dare. It's this kind of message of being bold. So in this particular phase of my work, it was bringing in color. Like bright color, really learning color from these artists and a handful of others, but James Jean in particular, because he goes from this like hyper illustrative style to like this realism that kind of goes back and forth. It's this going back and forth, like how to really create tension in the artwork that makes me really interested in making artwork. So there's lots of different ways that I'm looking to create tension and make things pop, make you invest into the work. Looking at some of the work that I have here at the gallery, you'll see that a lot of the pieces have a border that has text, because I want you to be able to engage in the work not just visually, but I want you to be able to engage in the work intellectually, find curiosity. Oh, maybe I can't see the top. What is that saying? There's mysteries inside the work. There's conceptuality happening throughout the entire work, as opposed to just talking about, oh, it's only a straight portrait. It's only a cool image that I came up and put down. So the work of myself as an artist is kind of like that of a philosopher, of having a body of work, of having a set of ideas that I want to work with, and really finding ways to interpret that. And so, so this was pop surrealism and my early work, and I'm about 20 minutes in, so I think I'm on time. Cool. So this then led to the period from about, I want to say 2013 through, frankly, today, and that's Seeking Soma Art. So Seeking Soma Art was the brand that I created specifically for making this type of work around ecstatic states, non-ordinary states, psychedelic states. this was around, like I said, around 2014, like the internet was abuzz, talking about psychedelia, non-ordinary states, Stan Groff, Terence McKenna, like all of these people who are really, really going deep into these subjects. And as I was getting influenced in them, this was actually the first piece that I made in this series. This is actually part of a previous series, a series of tarot decks, a series of tarot cards, and that was the World card. That deck was based off of role-playing game characters, and this particular character happened to be a hippie, happened to have like this whole like world-changing psychedelia, moving through time thing, not only representing that as kind of like stop-motion movement, but also referencing back, of course, to Indian mythology, which plays a huge role in my work later on. Which eventually, because of some other things that I have not put up here, including art history classes, I eventually became Buddhist from finding lots of Buddhist artworks that resonated and eventually diving into that philosophy. So India in particular has been a huge influence overall, which is kind of not surprising given our zeitgeist, our milieu of appropriating other cultures. I mean, like you come up in Washington, D.C., and there's so many other cultures over there. After a certain while, it's kind of like, what culture am I really a part of? I've gotten so many influences from different places. This has now become something that's very personal for me of how to see the artwork in these particular lights. So this over here, so this is kind of so back in the day, when people talked about a masterpiece, it wasn't, this is a great work that is being made. A masterpiece is a very specific thing. It is the piece that says, I am a master at this craft. It is my graduation thesis. It is the one that says, I am ready to go to present my work to the world. You present your work to the master says yes, you become then a master, you graduate with the title of master, that is your masterpiece. To me, this is my masterpiece, and I see this as world religions. As a tour of world religions. It was named the transcendental object at the end of time, but now I'm naming it Seeking Soma because it's really the one that, because it started it all, I wanted to name it the same as that period of time that I was working with. And so I have here some tarot symbolism with the four animals up top. I have Illuminati symbolism, I have Zen symbolism. These two are Chan deities, Chan being Zen in China, the Tree of Life, a Tibetan Yamantaka, a Baphomet. This is Virgin Mary, but it's not the Christian Virgin Mary, it is the syncretic Virgin Mary of Wudang and the syncretic South American, Pan-African religions. Yoruba in particular. And of course Ganesh over here. And you'll notice this little callback here, this little drip of blood coming in from the tusk, which is a direct reference to Martin Whitworth and his bleeding tusks. So like I like to go back and kind of give nods to the artists that influenced me. This one is really kind of hard to see up here. This is huge. Hopefully it'll be here in, what is it called? September, October, for a Halloween show that's going on here. But this is a piece about ayahuasca. It is an intention-setting piece, should I ever actually end up doing ayahuasca, to really say, please, this is my offering to you. This is my art offering to the world. So if and when that ever does happen, I have given something to the grandmother spirit. And yeah, so these are all Amazonian snakes. These are Amazonian flowers. The vines are all, again, Amazonian. The plants that are made to create ayahuasca. And the two snakes are actually in the shapes of the molecules of ayahuasca. So they link together, and you can't really see them too well here, but there's like the molecule the letters NH around here, OH, to kind of like denote what the molecule actually is. So if you're familiar with chemistry and had a better monitor, you could probably see that. But then going back to some of the Buddhist influences here and the Indian influences, I decided to create Maitreya as a contemporary figure. Without going too much into the symbolism here, One of the main things that I wanted to point out for this painting was, again, looking at like the overall view of some of these paintings, of the same type of busyness that kind of James Jean is really bringing in, kind of bringing in some of the, there's a certain physicality of somebody like Martin Whitworth or Hanayata that I really, again, also want to bring in, something that's very visceral, something that is very present and in your face. I was also started working with some line work. These originally came out as original doodles, as kind of like playing with lines and just kind of seeing what I can do with them, until eventually they became a whole series separate from the more representational work that I was doing. So yeah, so these works, I title them, or the series, I kind of call it replications. Here is the Buddha being all psychedelic and kind of somewhat of a representation of certain internal states that I've experienced myself in the middle of during these non-ordinary states. This one here, in honor of Albert Hofmann and his discovery of LSD, I made this one. This is a take on a previous theme. You'll notice I do a lot of master copy type work. So this is effectively a master copy of a psychedelic blotter paper that was out in the 1960s. I wanted to turn that and make that my own. So one of the things you can't tell from this image is that this is actually 7 layers of epoxy with paint in between, kind of like some of the goldfish things that you might see on like Facebook, different memes. So this is a layered work, so you can move it around and see the shadows and see it move around just a little bit. It's enough to give it a visual depth. And this is a mural that is currently up in Wallingford at 45th and 45th Street and I think First Avenue? Yeah, somewhere right around there. But yeah, the American Mary is the dispensary right there. The mural's huge. They currently have it blocked off. There's some tagging over here, which they haven't asked me to repair yet. But the iguana is still in full view, which is lovely. For me anyway. Yeah, so in talking about the color, we'll see, like, you see how the work kind of went from this really dark, this really morose, this really kind of internalized, hollow eyes, bald hair, lack of identity, lack of a self in a way. This is kind of like bodies existing without, not necessarily without a soul, but like without some type of human connection. Which is exactly how I felt in my early 20s. Now that I'm more mature, I've done a lot of work internally, I did the work to reconnect myself with my artwork, I start creating big, bright things, but they're also kind of like the previous work, in your face. These are things that I want to, I want you to look at them and walk away just slightly stunned as like, what exactly am I looking at? Exactly what am I looking at? And it's kind of a puzzle. I want the viewer to figure some things out about the piece itself. Because not everything needs to be immediately visible. It's one of the things I really hate about NFTs is that here's just a digital image. I have a digital image that can be easily copied. But to make actual artwork, you have to have, actual artwork. To make the type of artwork that I want to make, there's a lot of conceptuality, there's a lot of thought that goes behind it. And I want the viewer to have a reason to spend time there. I want there to be a payoff when you actually stand in front of the piece and look at it. Which leads me to the current work that I'm doing right now, which is primarily the portraits. So again, during the period of Seeking Soma Art, I was watching this show, Portrait Artist of the Year 2020, whichever, Portrait Art of the Year, Sky Arts. It is, the British baking show that, super sweet, everybody loves each other, there's no real competition. It's kind of that show, but with painting. They have 9 painters. They all paint, 3 of them paint one model, and they're like famous British people. And there's an elimination competition, and at the end they paint somebody like Ian McClellan or who's the guy who played Nightcrawler in X-Men movie? Alan Cumming. People painting people like that who are really big names over there. But if you ever get the chance to watch a show, it's on YouTube. It's hard to find. Watch as many seasons as you can. You don't necessarily have to be going in any particular order. It's just lovely and they're sweet. Yeah, fantastic. And it influenced me to work in portraits. And I kind of found a whole bunch of people, like Instagram was really great because I found a whole bunch of people creating these faces and these, making weird faces. And so after a while, it's just like started seeing enough of them. And a lot of the festy people that go to festivals, people wearing, neon, people wearing skimpy clothing, people doing all of these things. And I decided, like, I kind of need to talk about the counterculture movement that I'm in the middle of. Like here in Seattle, Seattle's kind of a weird place that you kind of have to look for what you want. Like it's not going to be immediate, it's not going to jump out at you, but if you start digging, everything is here. And so the Seattle counterculture, which most of you here in the audience, I met through the counterculture in some way or another. This is what I wanted to represent. It's like, hey, what happened to the society painters of the 1800s? Like where's the society painters now? Like where is anybody representing who we are? And so all of the court dramas that were happening in society back then are still happening now. People sleeping with the wrong person, people cheating the wrong person on the thing. There's some sort of like ego thing because this person doesn't like that person, whatever. It's all happening here. So why aren't we also representing ourselves visually of who we are in the present day? And so while that may not necessarily be an ecstatic state, it is ecstatic state related because if you look at counterculture throughout history, people like Allen Ginsberg, people again like Wendy Warhol, Mike Rothko, like they're all big personalities trying to talk about a different way of being, a different way of life. So this one is called Lisa Crank. After Lisa Frank, a little pun. A lot of the titles have some type of pun or something going along with them to kind of give you a hint as to what's actually going on internally. So both of these actually, this one you can't sell in this picture, but has a black light effect around it, an invisible black light that says "Namaste, motherfuckers" around it. But this one is one of the first invisible blacklight paintings that I did. And so you can see the Madam X, which I showed earlier from John Sargent Singer, did a master copy, wanted to fuck it up for the 21st century. So I painted her in red. She was a licentious woman at the time, but being a slut's okay now. So this is a very different presentation. This is saying, no, yes, I am coming in my full form. Originally, the strap on the left-hand side was down, as you see it here, but then Sargent repainted it and put it above her shoulder. I'm like, no, we are owning this, so this comes down. She wears red now. And also talking about the mortality in here. So this is a little bit about sex, a little bit about death, a little bit about that ecstatic state, and a little bit of that hidden energy that I think is the underlying buzz in our communities. Because there's always like this little buzz, and this is, I think, why we come. There's something always sparking our interest here. Then Blazing June was a master study of Flaming June. So I wanted to talk about, speaking of color, a woman of color. I mean, the original was made for a bathroom. It was made to kind of like look like the marble statues and stuff around her. So this is really sterile. Like, why is such a beautiful painting so sterile? It needs to be soft. It needs to be inviting. So pillows and cannabis and just softness. Like I wanted the panties. I didn't want lace panties because those are hard. I wanted soft cotton panties, and you can tell because of the texture of like how the polka dots are. I've never seen any other thing but a cotton panty have those. So yeah, and then I wanted just one little thing here that's kind of like, no, there's a little bit of organic hardness. There's a lizard. It's not a koala. It's not anything else, but it's something soft. And kind of going through this one is not in the current show. This is Vala Maria. That is a Virgin Mary, a contemporary take on Virgin Mary as a Mexican deity. And through here we have, these are all the works in the current show. Curly Fries is a friend of a friend. This one over here, Mystery Babylon, was an OnlyFans model. Rocket over here, she is a friend of mine as well. Pandora was a Tinder date. So just people that I've met throughout being here, working in this environment. So this is where the work has been over the past, I want to say 4 years. So kind of what ended up happening was I ended up having a divorce, left all my stuff at my place before I like fully moved out, and I needed something to paint with. So I picked up some oil paints and started doing portraits because I wasn't having the creativity, and found out I love to make portraits, and so I kind of been running with it. So this is setting up for a show here next year in July, where I'll be having a solo show, hopefully taking over the entire gallery with these portraits. And these two down here kind of represent a new direction. As I explore erotic work, one of the things that's really kind of striking to me is LED lighting. This LED lighting of, we're in rooms that are like just lit in red, or like color changes, or something that's kind of like just intense color-wise. I mean, if we go to a club, if we go to a party, if we have it in our homes, I have it in my homes, all these LED bulbs, like we have such control over color between chemical, our wardrobe, between lighting. It gives me this feel. It gives me this feel like, hey, there's this orange light going on up top. There is this intense sexual scene happening here. This is a reality. This is effectively a portrait, but it's a representation of so many of the things that occur in our spaces. So this one itself is called This Could Have Been Us, from a date that did not go as planned, as hoped. And then there's this one, which is my current favorite. Again, with this idea of like stark colors, like really kind of choosing subjects that are this really bold color choices, really bold contrast of colors, which is one of the themes that is going to be going in a series of ongoing erotic artworks. So yeah, that kind of brings me to Critical Northwest, which was the festival here in the Pacific Northwest, here in Mount Vernon in Washington. Happened early July. I think most of us here were there. But you may have seen on the Esplanade these three artworks. So these are the digitals, having, again, some monitor issues, some details not being seen. But these are the originals of the works. These are some of the works in progress. This is me putting them together on my floor in my living room, stitching them together, figuring out how they're going to look. A lot of the stuff hadn't been painted here. But the technique was putting a projector from the top of the ceiling down onto the floor, actually down onto the coffee table, and that did about a 4-foot by 3-foot section that I could just trace and paint by colors on top. And so here is the only picture I have of them actually freestanding. Again, 8 feet tall, cut up into 3 different sections. They're composed to be a triptych. So there's the mountain line that goes all the way across, similar themes and colors, similar energy radiating outwards from the man, but each of them having their own individual themes. This one over here on the left-hand side with the orca is more about the Pacific Northwest. It's kind of talking about like these aliens and aurora and bears, which that looks like a bear kind of over there. Not so much in the actual mural. Yeah, so this one is, like I said, Pacific Northwest themed. This one is more Burning Man themed. And I have recently been pointed out that this is basically just one big vagina and vulva, vagina, a whole bunch of vulvas on this page. Apparently this is a clitoris. This little mole over here with his, he's got a little nose that looks like an anus, bushy hair, and it's apparently just like this whole spread eagle motif that I'd never saw, but Jen pointed out to me, and now I can't unsee. This is the more, a psychedelic trip in the desert off of cacti. This is more rock and roll, and this is kind of referencing what is it called? The biblically accurate angel with Alex Gray references. You see these little eyes over there? They're the same as this theme. Yeah, and so this is the actual works in situ. They look fantastic in rotating lights. And so one of the things I try to do with color is to make it pop out in different ways. Make it pop out in different ways in these types of rotating colors. They have to look different whenever they're lit in those different patterns. Again, this is kind of like part of the layering, but it's a layering that requires an external component. So this one, like in particular with the coloration, like having these high contrast colors with each other, very close by to each other, helps the eye kind of dart around these individual pieces, and in a sense makes when you look up close, it's a little bit more jumbled, a little bit more chaotic, but as you pull back, you see a lot more overall patterns. Like this is a pattern up here. The eye recognizes this pattern as one flat object. It recognizes this shape as another flat object. So I can start constructing things that have different colorations that are intended to pop back and forth. Hot colors, warm colors versus cool colors, like making sure that they vibrate against each other so that when you look at it, your eye can never really settle on any one particular piece and is always wants to move around. And looking at this one in particular, these types of patterns over here, they're doing kind of something, they're doing double work. They kind of look like topological maps, but if we look at the values of them, they have a different topology. So when the eye looks at it, it doesn't necessarily notice to see like it has to think about the shape. It has to think about the shape. And it's asking you to engage with it, because what is it that I'm really looking at? How do I really understand the work? And hopefully getting you to ask questions around it. There's a show here at Gallery Erato next year, which will be the culmination of the portrait work. I have way too many people that I want to paint over the next coming years. I think I have some 12 paintings that I have to finish in 8 months, which is heroic. But this is kind of what I do, is just put on heroic work, or heroic efforts anyway. Not necessarily a healthy thing. But yeah, so some other things that I want to do is I want to lean more into the erotic, more into the Latin specifically, because that's one of the things that I have really neglected in my overall body of work, is specifically talking about the Latin experience and indigenous experience. As well as more of the ecstatic themed, more high concept work that I've been doing in the past. I love the portraits, but I really want something more conceptually beefy than just a face. So working a little bit less on portraiture, I'm still going to make that a big part of what I do, but just maybe 25% of the overall body of work. And one of the big things that's going on too is I'll be dropping the Seeking Soma brand. So I recently had a faux pas here at Gallery Erato where I didn't recognize my own name on the announcements because I was looking for Miguel Eduardo. And I've had multiple people ask me, what in the world is Seeking Soma art? Seeking Soma is seeking embodiment, seeking a divine embodiment, seeking the ability for us to be physically, emotionally present here. And I am doing this through artwork. However, the brand itself doesn't really communicate, so Miguel Eduardo does. I am the brand, I'm the person who's bringing this to this. So I'm, in a sense, done hiding behind that name, and I'm putting myself forward as the artist who's making this work. So, and of course, I'm looking to make a lot smaller works. You'll see a couple of like 1 foot by 1 foot paintings. So I want to make much smaller format work, but I'll at least do like 1 or 2 gargantuan works over the next like 3 or 4 years. Something at like really large scale that isn't a mural, but is almost mural sized. So I have no idea where to store it. I just really love working on large works, and it's something that I've missed overall, just doing portraitures, doing small canvases. So that kind of wraps up this is kind of like the chronological, like I said, journey of the work. I have some time to answer questions if anybody has questions or comments or concerns. Okay. Jen?
Can you talk about your creative process, how you actually make the work?
Thank you. A little bit too focused on showing the work as opposed to talking making the work. Is there any particular ones that you, because they all have slightly different process.
Ones with the wording on the outside.
Ones with the wording around the outside. Do I have, okay, so let's come into seeking some, no, portraits. So the ones with the wording on the outside really started with her, and I prefer to paint on wood. The wood panels, I didn't want a frame on them because who wants to buy an extra frame? So the wording around the sides was a way to engage the viewer and deliver more of the mood that I'm looking for in the particular piece. And engage the viewer, give them a mystery, give them something to, like, if they see the author, if they recognize the quote, people will start to relate to these pieces. This is also a courtesy to the collector because they don't have to buy a frame, like $400 or $500 frame, you're already spending however much money on a particular painting. There's no need for extra stuff. I want it to be all contained into one thing. The other thing that the thing around the sides does is it makes it really hard to photograph. You really can't get the full impression of the piece because it's sculptural, it's three-dimensional. There's some of these that I'm planning that have cutouts on the sides where I can fill them with epoxy and have LEDs in the back so the letters actually glow. There's all sorts of stuff that I want to do with the sides. Whenever I do the sides, they take almost as much work as the actual painting. So if I come to this one has probably one of the simplest letterings and one of the best processes that I've had to use because I decided to use spray paint for a lot of this stuff and just masking stuff out, and it's been just so much faster to actually construct those sides because of this particular work, which only just happened this year. So I'm trying to find ways to optimize this because taking 40 hours to write the border is kind of unacceptable, and I just wanted to really speed that up. Yeah. So that's kind of the process on the sides. The different paintings really have different processes. It kind of depends on what's really going on, but they all kind of start with a grid, a transfer, then starting to block in certain areas. I often work with the most fun area first. This arm over here, I did in a single day, and I was just like, oh my God, like this just kind of came out perfect the first shot. Whereas this area probably took me 5 or 6 attempts to do, and probably spent 20 hours just on this spot over here. Whereas this spot maybe took me 5 hours after having completed that, having worked on that for quite a while. So yeah, the paintings is really, I'm always trying to figure out what the better process is of what materials to use. Speaking of materials, blacklight neon is incredibly difficult to work with. So that's part of the reason. This one's all painted in all neons. This will glow brilliantly in blacklight. But the reason I use spray paint for this particular painting is because nothing else really had the even coverage. No other blacklight material had the even coverage that spray paint did. And is just really very thin, really hard to work with in oil paint, in acrylic paint, whatever type of paint that I use. The only thing that I've really found useful in this case has been spray paint. So some of these are mixed media to different degrees or another. Different media.
What part of this is spray paint?
The entire background is spray paint. All of the pink there. Yeah. Any further clarifications on process? How do I choose the colors? So choosing the colors has a lot to do with contrast. So colors, when put together, they're literally vibrations of light. They will vibrate together. And so you'll look at them, and there's a certain edge where it's almost, it just drives more tension. I'm looking to drive tension in these artworks. I'm looking to see what colors can I put together to keep the eye kind of darting around. So you can't necessarily settle in one place for too long, but there are places that I make that where you are supposed to settle. Like for example here, I settle often on her face, but this is because like everything is kind of moving up towards that. The focal area is really these bright yellows, which contrast and vibrate against this particular pink. In black light, this kind of like shines even more kind of obnoxious. But it's kind of like takes you to this really dark place, this really like this very kind of like peaceful face in this kind of like garish room. So the selection of color has to do with how's it going to make you feel? How does it look? Are the colors, do they go together in a certain way? They're not necessarily flowing together, but they are working together. Another one for color is this one. So this one was really nice because I had a lot of different patterns on here. But in choosing the colors, it's often like kind of like a puzzle game. So I'll put like say a red and a green and a blue over here, or some other thing over here. And there's only so many colors I can work with and put next to that. So it becomes like this intellectual process. I've used all of these colors already. So this is actually one of the things. So I work with really high saturated colors, so which means I have 6 colors to work with. If you work with dull, more muted colors, you have a huge color palette because if you paint outside, these are all slight variations of gray. But no, I'm using really bright, almost out of the tube colors often, as high chroma as I can get. So mixing those colors together, if I don't do some of this like dancing math to maintain the color not the color temperature, but the color saturation, then I'm have to like bounce around back and forth and pick a lot of different colors. And this is kind of what I'm doing here. Boftos?
So in regard to like painting and different materials that you have access to, I've seen things come out like super black paints, you know, that you can't see any reflection from, that are like
Yeah.
carbon-based, graphene-based, the super pigs black 2.0 to mirror finishes.
Yeah.
Are there any materials that you're really excited to paint with that you haven't explored yet, or anything that maybe is on this dream list that is yet to be invented?
So the biggest one is Vanta Black. Vanta Black, there's a whole culture hustle. Anish Kapoor can only be the person to use Vanta Black, the blackest black that's ever out there. The culture hustle material is not for me. Smells kind of weird, and the black, if I'm going to varnish it, if I'm going to do anything to it, then it's going to remove the mateness of the material. So it's not been the best thing. What's been
Black 2.0, what is the culture?
Culture Hustle is the one that makes the blackest black.
The Vanta Black.
Yeah, the Vanta. Oh, no, the Vanta Black is the one that's like made with like some sort of nickel iodine polymer. That, yeah, and that absorbs like 99.5% of the light. And that one is crazy. But so what I found from Culture Hustle as well is they have raw pigments. You can buy raw pigments of fluorescent colors and mix them in with your own medium. So I've started using that, and now I'm trying to figure out how to grind it properly so I don't end up with a sandy painting. So really kind of playing with the different mediums. I am a materials nerd. I've worked with everything from wood to welding, so a little bit of glass blowing, print making, silicone molds, wax. I know a ton of different materials. So whenever I see something, I'm like, I haven't played with this yet. Let me go ahead and pick it up. Watercolors is one of my least proficient medium, which I hope to be doing more work in watercolor coming up in the future. Watercolor and what is the other one? Screen printing. I've never done screen printing. So I actually want to screen print, what is it called? Samsara, this pink one that I was just showing, because that one would really lend itself well to the multiple passes. And I've talked to you about printing that same one in 3D so that so this is a kind of a 3D bas-relief print done on a 3D printer, but with different layers having different colors, and hopefully to achieve the same effect that I'm getting here, but in physical form. And I can make it at any size. Yeah. Yeah.
Very excited.
Oh no, I'm very excited about that too. Yeah, I haven't gotten around to doing the Photoshop pieces, but I will on that. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Please, Roxy.
Yeah, you mentioned that you wanted to do more burner art, and I wondered, like, how is that different? Like, I saw the piece that you did for Critical,
Yeah.
and it was really interesting the way that you used colored light in conjunction with the
Mhm.
painting.
Yeah.
So was that like a consequence of like where you were showing it, as opposed to it being in a gallery?
No, so I was live painting. I do a lot of live painting, and somebody lent me some lights, and I found it out by accident. I'm like, oh, you can do this, and so I can now start thinking about like how can I construct these different things. Ellie, who's here, she's helping me with some black light bulbs that I want to be able to use to demonstrate some of the invisible black light work in a gallery setting. So working with lighting on that. As far as the rotating lights, we're reaching time, but I can be here for forever as long as the gallery is okay with it. Pardon? Okay. Let me know. Just we can wrap up whenever you're ready, and as long as the people ask questions, and I will still be here and keep talking. Anyway, as far as burner art, so this is interesting. The particular piece that I made, I can't not think about the materials in a certain way. Like I have to be able to choose and select them and know about them and prep them in all of the meticulous ways that I know about materials. So for that particular piece, I had to dumb myself down in a way of like, what is burner art really about? This DIY aesthetic. What is the DIY aesthetic? What is not necessarily cheap, but it's got to look like it's handmade. It's got to be handmade. So the process was really made to reproduce how somebody might just take a piece of plywood and paint on it. Because I can't just take a piece of plywood and paint on it. I have to think through it and have to reproduce that process. So even how it was made had to be reproduced for the particular environment. In terms of future burner art, one of the things that's missing in Critical Northwest is large scale work, like really gigantic work. So Ellie, Jen, Sarah, and myself are talking about how to create inflatables. And maybe we take huge burner work that can fit in a trunk, because it's just a big parachute folded up a whole bunch of different ways. Who knows? Like there's that type of stuff. I did my first performance, a ritual sacrifice at this past Critical. And I'm really curious to do that again. I've never worked with performance again before, so I want to do more of that. I want to do more tongue-in-cheek things that aren't necessarily tied to the primary brand name around that type of work. What I found this year was I can only invest so much time into burner work without taking away from my painting work. So it's really got to be finding out how to balance that out. I have no pieces planned for next year, but I'm sure they'll come up as time goes on.
I was going to ask about the burner, about burner stuff as
Mhm.
well, and whether you saw opportunities for doing more installations or
Yeah.
sort of pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the reasons I made the murals that I did for Critical was because I do not see painting at Burns. I just do not see painting. I see lots of sculpture, I see lots of LED, I see lots of technology, lots of things, but very little like manually, physically crafted work. Yeah. So yeah.
I'm chuckling because that was the motivation for all of the live music.
Yeah.
This
Yeah,
is
exactly.
Like wanting analog human created music.
Yeah. So in case we're not getting this recorded, Skips and her partner Fancy put on a violin concerto performance.
It was a classical quartet
Yeah.
doing
Yeah, a classical
very
quartet.
mood specific
Yeah.
pieces of music that my partner arranged.
Yeah. So
Woods with naturalness.
So yeah, having that analog component of putting my hands on instruments really made it is really something that I feel is missing at Critical in this particular way. Again, handmade music or handmade painting type work. I will be going to soak. Okay. Cool. I think this is the end of the questions. So thank you so much. Thank you for coming. This has been fantastic.
Oh, also like the change from Soma art to like holding all of that, spicy artwork under your own name. It's like I had a lot of
Yeah, thank you.
That's a big deal.
Thank you. Cool.